The economy added 41,000 jobs in February on the heels of a similar gain in January. StatCan reports that the unemployment rate ticked up to 5.8% as employment gains continued to lag strong population growth. Job gains were spread across several industries in the services producing sector, with the strongest employment growth in accommodation and food services. Joining us now to unpack Canada's latest job figures and other economic trends is Brendan Caldwell, Director at Caldwell Securities Ltd. Thanks for joining us, Brendan.
Always glad to be here, Julie.
So, let's discuss the job numbers from Friday, specifically the split between government jobs added and private sector jobs lost.
Yeah, so the government, broadly speaking, has its foot on both the gas and the accelerator. The accelerator and the brake at the same time. The central bank is the brake. It's the one that's raised short-term interest rates and made mortgages and houses less affordable by just making the cost of borrowing that much higher. Okay, very well. The point of that is to try and slow down the economy, to reduce the demand for money, just to cool it out in order to get inflation under control. We seem to not have cared about inflation when it was asset inflation, when it was the price of stocks and real estate that were going up for the previous 20 years of very low interest rates. But now we seem to care because the price of everything everybody needs to live on. And if you look at the food banks, they're lined up right around the corner. So, okay, let's try and get inflation under control. So that's the central bank. But the federal government, on the other hand, and governments actually at all levels, have been doing everything they can in terms of fiscal spending to keep the party going, so that the punch bowl that the central bank is trying to take away, the governments at all levels, federal government, provincial government, municipal, are hiring and hiring and hiring and spending more and more money in order to make sure that none of the effects, or as little of the effects, of higher interest rates are actually felt. What that's meant is that while the the unemployment number has stayed fairly low, it's meant that that's come at the expense of actual businesses being able to employ people. Instead, the government has been employing more and more and more people and spending more and more money to do so. It's creating an interesting conundrum, having your foot on the accelerator and the brake at the same time.
So, what do you make of the reporting that Canadians are paying excessive bank fees?
Well, you could substitute industry here. We are a very small country population-wise. We're not the European Union, which is like one big mega country. We're not the United States. We're not China. We're not India. We're a country of 40 million people, which is fine. It wouldn't be an insurmountable problem if it were not so geographically spread. So we're the second largest nation geographically, but I don't know, 39th in population, give or take. And we want to have our own industries in everything. And in fact, our local companies dominate the day-to-day services we receive: banking, cable, airlines, trains. It's not a bad thing to have dominant Canadian companies, but these oligopolies in various areas, like any oligopoly, do have an ability to maximize profits because there isn't the same robust competition in any of these areas. Grocery stores are much the same thing, as I think we've covered in our discussion. So having a limited competition over a relatively small market spread over a large area, means that we're paying higher fees. So it's not a great surprise. And the single most effective lobby at the federal government level in the history of this country has always been the Canadian Bankers Association.
Hmm. We've heard the old term crowding out effect. Please explain it, and does it still work?
Okay. I think it works, but in a different way. The old term meant, and this is what I was saying at the beginning of the conversation, that governments borrow money. It crowds out the ability of the private sector to borrow money. So that's what originally meant. But now I think we're seeing it at a deeper level, where if the government's going to employ you for $100,000 a year with an index pension, how does it make it possible for private sector businesses who have to make a profit, something the government never has to do? How does a private sector employer compete with that to hire somebody to do a similar sort of job, administrative, what have you. So I think you're seeing a crowding out effect in the employment sector. Now, whether this is intentional or an accidental byproduct by the governments at all levels remains to be seen, but it makes it more difficult. And I think the numbers you quoted at the beginning bear it out. Government's hiring more, private sector can't afford to keep as many people. So while the unemployment rate, I should say, is staying relatively consistent, it's at the expense of businesses, which are ultimately the ones that generate the taxes that make the government fundable. It comes at the expense of private businesses being able to operate and to hire people.
Brendan, thank you, as always, for joining us on the show and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you, Julie. Have a great week.
Take care.